So let's get started with some introductions. We have a brand new panel of fantastic speakers joining us to share their experiences and insights. I'll ask each of them to introduce themselves, tell us a little bit about where they're calling in from, and maybe explain a little bit about why they're excited to be here today. Why don't we bring them up onto the stage? And then we'll start with Andrea. Andrea, tell us about yourself.
Hi there, I'm Andrea Corey. I'm at FreshBooks, which is a fintech accounting for small business SaaS solution. And I'm Senior Director of Engineering there. So I have a number of different teams that build product functionality, as well as some of the more infrastructure-focused teams who help support our solution. I've been building SaaS platforms and applications for more than 20 years, for quite a while, spanning MarTech, so marketing technology, sales technology. So I've actually been both sides of this equation, buying solutions and then helping to, show the value of my solutions to a B2B audience and supporting the sales team and sort of their customers' technical evaluations of products. So I'm really excited to talk about all these topics because I think that having a strong relationship with vendors is really important to the success.
Terrific, yes. And then next we'll go to Cisco. Cisco, where are you? And tell us about yourself.
So my name is Cisco Vila. I am calling in from Atlanta. I am here representing MailChimp in Atlanta and happy to be talking to everybody. I'm currently the Director of Engineering over areas of infrastructure for MailChimp, delivering email, delivering on an all-encompassing marketing solution for small business, which is what we do. So I have been also in infrastructure and basically in engineering for over 20 years. I love what I'm talking about today because it is something that we have to deal with often and we have to deal with a lot. And usually, sometimes we're kind of making it up as we go along. So getting information in any sort of way is pretty awesome. So glad to be here.
Excellent. And next we'll turn to Fatima. Fatima, can you tell us about where you are, who you are, and why you're excited to be here?
Hi, I'm Fatima. I am calling in from Seattle. I am a production engineer at Facebook. I'm not a director of anything. And my experience with vendor software comes from some of my jobs at companies that actually use vendor software, like Yelp and Rackspace, in which case I was an engineer there and I had to deal with actually using the software that we ended up sourcing. And a lot of my experience with vendors comes from conference organizing. I've been involved with Lisa and SRECon for the past 3 or 4 years, I can't remember. And I have a lot of experience picking out the bad ones from the good ones, especially when it comes to letting them give talks.
Definitely. Fantastic. And then last but not least, Mike, where are you? Who are you? And tell us about yourself.
Yeah, I'm Mike. I am out in the San Francisco Bay Area. I'm an engineering manager at Rollbar. So like Fatima, I am also not a director of anything. But I can say as of, I guess, this month, I can say I have over 10 years of experience in the software industry. So I manage the team that works on the core product at Rollbar. So building and maintaining the actual dashboard and SaaS application that users, that our customers use to look at their errors, monitor, debug, and do everything that they need to do on the Rollbar platform. Prior to this, I was at a company called Optimizely. Was there for 6 years. So have been in the SaaS business for some time now. Also fighting this battle with trying to convince people to not build their own platform, right? To not build their own and to outsource to the people who are the pros at it, who are in the market to win it. So, and I'm excited to be here because it's my first time being part of a panel like this, and I'm happy to share my experiences, but also learn from my fellow speakers as well.
Wonderful. Yes, I think there's a lot of interesting, different experience in this panel. I'm very excited to learn as well. So purchasing a new tool or product for your company can be an effective way of using your cash to accelerate your company's success. But there are a lot of hurdles finding the right product, integrating it, getting it adopted. So we're going to talk through the experiences our panel have had and increase your chances of getting through this process successfully. So why don't we start off with a question that I'll pass to all four of you. We'll start again with Andrea. But so when evaluating potential platforms or tools, what are the top one or two key factors that you consider?
Yeah, so there's a lot of considerations that are technical, that are cost, that are a maturity of the organization, and then also that relationship aspect that I alluded to kind of in my intro. And so for me, it's starting to juggle all of those simultaneously and starting to look at, okay, is this organization mature at the thing that they are offering? Can I understand the costs that I will bear, both the hard costs of the solution and also the running costs of whatever that will involve for the team? Do I trust these people? Like, is this process going well with the sales process? And, you know, I've had some things that start off quite rocky on the trust front, and it's usually a big red flag for me. So, yeah, I'm kind of simultaneously bouncing through these different concerns in those early discussions.
Yeah, definitely. How about you, Cisco? What are the top things you're considering when considering a vendor?
I definitely think a lot of the things we're going to be talking about are very cumulative in nature, so I'll go ahead and add that. And I love the things that Andrea said. But we look at in-house skills. We look at things like long-term value and consideration, right? Whether or not we have alignment in the future with the vendor, and whether or not they actually meet our expectations of what our current roadmaps are. Obviously, it's important, as was said, right? Technical requirements, people requirements, right? How much capacity do we have to do things? What are the opportunity costs that we have in front of us that we have to measure? So all of those are some things that we kind of think about.
Great. And then Fatima, how about you? What are you considering when talking with vendors?
Yeah, definitely. Obviously, we are pretty much building on top of each other. So everything that Cisco and Andrea said is obviously true. But I think one thing that is a good indicator of whether or not you'll be able to work with the team going forward is like kind of the attitude of the salespeople. Because usually you're not going to get to talk to an engineer right away. You're going to talk to the salespeople first because, you know, they're the ones selling you the product. And it can be indicative of like larger culture problems at a company if they have particular red flags, like interrupting you, talking over you, not taking your technical requirements like seriously, or minimizing things that you think are important. All of those things can be very indicative that they might be like more predatory, or, you know, like trying to sell you something, but not actually caring about what your requirements are.
Yes, definitely. And then Mike, I'll come to you last. Is there anything you want to add on to the list of things that are top of mind for you?
Yeah, I'll add to the list from everyone else. The one thing that I like to look at is if they provide libraries or open source any of their code, to look through their GitHub repositories, look through issues, and see how responsive they are. How do they communicate back and forth with people who have requests or have questions about things, and overall, what is their relationship to the developer community like?
Yeah, that's definitely some good signal there. Yes. So then let's start our journey at the point where you're considering buying something. And let's start maybe Cisco, since you're top left. I'll pick on you first. What homework are you doing before you even start talking to vendors?
So just to kind of take us down the technology path, right? Making sure that there is some type of alignment. But even before, the initial conversation happens, right? I mean, and it's interesting because we have actually, we have promoted our ability to actually correspond with a vendor from a diversity standpoint, right? And we look at whether or not it actually fits our cultural, basically, approach on things, right? Something as simple as that is it has incredible implications on who we decide to actually reach out to, right? But before that, obviously, technical considerations. What are we looking for? What are we looking to solve? Are we doing anything like that currently somewhere in our building, right? Large scale thing. Do we have the ability to, is there a hybrid approach that we can take? Based on those things is finding, okay, now that we have built a set of requirements, what is the best company for those requirements? Reach out to folks in the industry. Who have you worked with? Who has worked well? Attend in various, in other worlds, right? Conferences, right? Learn again, learn about who's doing what, and see who actually fits that bill. So that's one start of that approach.
Cool. Yes. And then Andrea, maybe come to you and ask you some question like, what's the prep you're doing before you even get on the phone call with a vendor?
Yeah, so the most recent kind of large evaluation we did was in the fall. We started off with like a kind of a broad market scan just to see, okay, what's even out there that starts to look like it might match what we're looking for. We were looking for a very specific piece of technology because we were going to have to retire something due to incompatibilities with something else. One of those situations where an upgrade over here forced us to replace another product. So we had a very specific need that was a short-term need. And then we also started to look at, well, what's our longer-term need here? So the initial market scan was sort of what's out there and how should we even focus this, right? And we then collected sort of some feedback to try and understand from executives involved in because it affected two departments actually. What is your interest in terms of the short-term pains we're experiencing versus the longer-term plan here? Because we had to plug this hole somewhat quickly, but we also didn't want to make this just a short-term decision. So there was a good conversation there where we were directed with a certain lens to take. And from there, we started to really hone that list of vendors and hone our requirements and create a bit of a scorecard to say, okay, this is how we're going to start to evaluate things, and looked at 3 vendors in much more detail than the 9 or so we started off with.
Great. Fatima, do you have anything that you're doing when you're just at the beginning of the buy journey?
So one thing about conference talks is that a lot of good conference talks are available for free online already. So something that can be really useful is not looking up their vendor pitch videos, but looking up what talks their engineers have given at conferences and sort of getting a vibe for the way that they operate. And another thing that can be useful is searching the name of the company on Twitter to see if people are complaining about it. Because I think, that is very honest. Usually people go to Twitter or back channel Slacks to complain about at work, so that you get more honest feedback from people who are already their customers. And the last thing I think that is sometimes missed because managers and directors kind of want to protect engineers from having to do the rigmarole of talking to salespeople and learning about vendors and, all of that stuff. But early on, I think it's good to rope in all of the engineers that you think might be interacting with this software and just, getting a feel from them. What vendors have they used for this kind of thing at other companies? Are they familiar with anything? Do they have any absolute no-goes? Getting that signal early on is good because you don't want to go down the line when you start introducing it to your team and they're like, I don't like that,
Oh yes, I know that feeling. So then another part at the start of the journey, sometimes you'll have other teams at your company you have to work with in order to select or go forward with a vendor. So maybe Mike, why don't we throw this to you? It's how do you manage the needs or concerns of other internal stakeholders with the needs of an engineering team?
Yeah, is that the previous roles, oftentimes the sort of the gatekeepers for whether we can end up using a particular vendor or not are the security, compliance, and finance department, right? It's whether we check all the check boxes from a security compliance standard, whether they have the right certifications in place, and whether that falls within the budget that we have for the organization. So, budget-wise, it's easy, right? There's a monetary value associated to it. There's constraints that we need to adhere to. So, trying to play within that box. On the security and the compliance side is just prior to choose having any conversation, really just having built up good relationships with them and know that and building up trust so that they know that, yeah, you are putting security and compliance ahead of, a lot of the other things that matter, and that you do your due diligence and check off those boxes for them and come to them prepared saying, hey, I think we can go with the solution, and these are all the checkboxes these are all the checkboxes that they check, and to try to negotiate on where they can give in and be aware of the risks that we're taking by maybe not checking some of those boxes, and having that research preparation up front so that we don't spend time arguing or discussing while talking about it. Yeah.
Great. So then maybe at the start of the project, you start of integrating. When are you thinking, let me get this right around. When do you think about switching platforms or building an in-house replacement? How much do you plan for a potential changeover during your initial implementation? And that's maybe Andrea. Do you have thoughts on that?
And sorry, how much do you plan for in terms of let's maybe get a little closer on the question.
Yes, sorry. My notes, I have a very grammatically poor sentence that caused me to forget what I was asking. But yeah, when you're planning, to buy something and integrate it, when are you thinking about planning for this being eventually phased out or swapped out versus this is the thing we're going to use forever?
Yeah, understanding the life cycle. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, no, that was in this example I gave earlier, that was absolutely one of the questions, was how long are we thinking about for this solution? Is it a short-term solution or a longer-term solution? And I think some, just given what the particular solution is providing, would necessarily need to be a very long-term solution with a solid vendor that you really expect is going to grow with you, right? So trying to understand your organization's needs, your scaling needs, depending on the type of solution, that can be very important depending on that criticality. For us, we would start to look at, is this critical to uptime? Is it critical to some of these core services we offer? Or is it more of an internal solution that is critical to our business, but less so to our external facing customers? So starting to understand those factors really, to me, is a good way to look at that question. And again, looking at the vendor maturity and like how often do they release? Like, to Mike's point, you can hop into their open source and things like that, and just look at their velocity a bit if you want to try and understand that, or try and get a history of how they've been evolving their product.
Definitely. And then so maybe let's assume that your first coming in is going to be long term, is the intention coming in. What signs do you look for to evaluate if a vendor is going to be a good long-term match? And I should direct that question to somebody. I apologize. Fatima, sorry. It's so much harder on virtual screens.
I think Cisco mentioned this before, is getting the vendor to share roadmaps with each other. So you want to share your roadmap with the vendor, and ideally they would also share their roadmap with you. When you have a company like AWS, the concern about using them long term is really, what are you going to do? Like, otherwise you're not going to go buy a data center. But with smaller companies, I think it works well when your company and the vendor company are kind of in the same place in terms of their growth. Like, not exactly the same, but that way you can kind of be growing together, and you can be assured that they care enough about your business that they want to keep up with you and make sure that they're not deprecating features that are important to you. And on that note, I would say it's very important to tell them clearly what features are important to your team, and ask them if they have any plans to deprecate those anytime soon, because a lot of the time what the vendor thinks is most important to the client isn't actually going to match up. Like, you might have a random use case that they are not aware of, and then 3 months down the line after you implement it, they might get rid of it. So knowing that definitely upfront will help you build a long-term relationship.
Cool. And then Mike, do you have anything to add to that thought?
Yes, I guess similarly along those lines is, the longer term relationships that you establish with their support team, or because I know one of the things that we do and we used to do back at Optimize is have these quarterly business reviews with our customers, so that we keep the pulse on things, but also tune into what their business is, what they're doing, and how we can help better. So I'm a huge fan of those.
Cool. And then Cisco, I saw you giving a thumbs up to what Fatima was saying. Is there anything you wanted to add to that?
No, I absolutely agree with that. I think something that I found to be hugely important in creating a long-term relationship is actually setting all the foundations up front, right? And setting all the expectations, how you communicate, what is expected from both companies, right? In this situation, it is a bi-directional basically engagement. It is not somebody is doing work only for somebody else. There has to be work on both sides of that equation. And for that to, or if you have to, what is this? What are the norms that the teams are going to be working through? What is expected in weekly, monthly, quarterly, some type of cadence of communication that has to happen between both areas, and set realistic goals and expectations throughout the process, right? And hopefully they're helping immensely to help through that, since you're purchasing a product from them. But that I think that the more work you set up early on, the more chance there is to long-term success in this case.
Definitely terrific. So, yeah, I think building on top of that, what does a healthy vendor-customer relationship look like? Like, if you think of one that's worked really well in the past for you, let's say Andrea, what are the signs that this is working well?
Yeah, I mean, I would say, as the SaaS kind of model came about, some time ago, the notion of customer success really came about because vendors realized, like, oh, they can switch at any time, like they're not necessarily locked into a 3-year thing anymore, and or this isn't sitting in a data center that's hard to move. The switching costs they're still there, but they're different. It really changed the game. And so having that person who is who wants you to be successful and not just spend money, having that person there supporting you, whether it's a technical person or more of a business person, it really depends on the organization and on the actual tool or product you're buying. But having that lens on somebody who is committed to your success, because that's an important part of their business to have successful customers. That's, to me, a very key element.
Yeah. So then, one of the things that's an option is sometimes you can be going and working with a vendor and partnering with them, and sometimes you're just putting your credit card number and you're just a customer. So maybe let's go Cisco. When does going into partnership with a vendor make sense instead of just taking the kind of plug and play route?
I think part of that involves how, what is the expected integration between your organization and the vendor product, right? I think that the almost the more integration there is, the more you have to basically utilize that partnership, right? If it's a tool that is being used in help of other tasks, right, then that can be managed. It really depends how much that tool is engaged, like with folks that are using it. Any vendor that has resulted in basically a good and a strategic part of the business value deserves that absolute partnership, right? That they have to have the commitment in order to help both, to help the company at that point in time, right? They become a critical piece of the infrastructure almost, depending on what it is that is being purchased. But in those cases, you have to have that partnership there. And by partnership, honesty about what works, what doesn't work, about what the capabilities of that company are. Do not oversell me, right? Do not promise the world and deliver nothing, right? Be brutally honest, because if you don't, then there is a capability, you have the possibility of failing yourself, right? So that's not a good look, obviously. So those are some of the things that I consider.
Terrific. Yes. Anyone else got anything to add on that? I'm just glancing at the screens.
Yeah, I have one thing. Just about what a healthy partnership with a vendor that you're working more closely with looks like. I think we do great jobs of being empathetic and blameless in our own companies amongst, our teammates and other teams that we're working with, and, having a lot of respect for each other and having that mutual respect. And I think with vendors, it's equally important to try to have the same blameless, respectful, empathetic view of them, which can be hard because you don't know them as much. They're not actually your coworkers. You've never met their kids, But on the other hand, if there isn't that sort of mutual respect and mutual empathy, it's going to, down the line, people are going to start feeling resentful, and it deteriorates the relationship really quickly.
That's an excellent point. I'll just take a second to remind our viewers that there is a Q&A box available at the right hand side of your screen. If there's any questions you would like me to put to the panel, please do use that. I have a screen updating here with it, but there's no questions in the box yet, so I would love to make sure we're answering the questions on your mind. But why don't we build on the what we've just talked about the kind of dependency that gets introduced when you integrate with an external vendor. Maybe Mike, I will turn to you. How do you think about and how do you evaluate a vendor's reliability?
Yeah, I think it's a function of how long have they been around, how much how long have they been doing this, how big is the company, but also I rely a lot on community, so asking people that I know about their experiences with such vendor. And it's now that I'm part of a much bigger community at Lead Dev, right? I have an extra Slack channel that I can ask folks about, and I think just being able to build trust with them, like Cisco mentioned, and understand and knowing that yes, they're going to be honest with me and not overselling me, but that if we talk about roadmap items and they make a commitment and say, hey, by the way, we're going to be releasing this around this time frame. It doesn't have to be an exact date, but that we can see that they stick to somewhere in the vicinity of that, and it's not them just dragging it on just to keep the contract alive. I think that's important.
And I think that's a good point as well, is you can pick up warning signs. Your spidey sense can tingle sometimes when working with an external partner like that. So maybe Fatima, what are things you're kind of watching out for? And what are things that have maybe made you consider changing a vendor?
Yeah, we talked about red flags a little bit earlier. Definitely this thing about, people not taking your technical requirements seriously or talking over you or not seeming to respect you is a huge one. But like some vendors bring like booth babes to conferences. Huge red flag. I don't want to that's really indicative of their culture and their values. So that's like a pretty big red flag that would probably make me not want to work with a vendor at all. But definitely, I think when you're working with them, like if they have an outage or if they, not being able to take accountability for their problems, like, we're humans, we all make mistakes. There's postmortem should be blameless, but accountability is really about like following up with us, like checking with us what the impact on our users was, how they're going to prevent this from happening in the future, like being really, really open and clear about that communication as if it was an internal postmortem. Like I want that much honesty from them. And like companies that don't do that are like difficult to work with. And I don't know if it would immediately make you want to switch, but it would at least make you want to have a serious conversation with them about like their level of honesty with you.
Definitely. How about you, Andrea? Any like red flags, warning signs, things that you keep an eye out for or have seen?
Yeah, I mean, in the evaluation process, it's happened to me several times where a vendor has doubted my technical abilities, which is kind of like we're done here with this conversation. I can't go forward if they're not going to understand that I can bring them certain data and they need to trust that data. I've had vendors doubt the data that I brought them. I've had vendors say, no, when I was doing a POC, no, you don't understand it. And I'm like, no, I'm telling you, I know how to profile my database. Like I can tell you that this is impacting my database. That's just a thing that's a very strong warning signal to me that, it's fine if we go back and forth once, but if we have to go back and forth more than once on the same topic and they're not taking me seriously, it's just not going to go forward for me.
Francisco, let's turn to you. Is there anything that you've seen or watch out for?
Yeah, I wanted to add to what Andrea and Fatima said. So there is something that has bugged me a lot when working with vendors, and that is I have a really, really amazing team of people that work in our organization, and it doesn't just have to be me that interfaces with them. Right, I can ask them to speak to my team, right? And my team is one of the best teams in the world, and a diverse team of people who all have knowledge, right, on how to solve problems. It doesn't have to be me. Don't keep coming back to me. They will work with you, and they will be just as successful as anything that I could ever say. They'll be better, even more, right? So that has to occur.
I think what I like about this discussion is not only is this helpful for anyone in our audience who might want to partner with a vendor, hopefully any of you who work for these vendors, these are things you should watch out for in your own organization. We're bringing value on all the levels here today. So I want to turn this more positive then. So that's things that kind of like, raise our spidey senses. Why don't you talk about what are things that you have done or have seen work well to set an integration up for success when working with a vendor?
Yeah, I think the most important thing for me is that the vendor offers a way to preview the tool before we even start the sales conversation, right? Very recently, I was searching for a tool to measure developer cycle time. And I reached out to some vendors, and one of them was very adamant in that, yeah, we don't offer free trials. You start paying us, and then we'll work with you, partner with you to get to what you want. I'm like, well, I can't commit to that because we're a startup. We don't have that kind of dough where we can just throw money at it. And so for me, being able to trial it, and maybe more of an extended trial, because 14 days is really not enough for you to even get something in the sprint and properly implement it. So I like to go for solutions that have a freemium, a free tier, right? Maybe you start a tier, you can try it out, take your time, but really dig in. And that comes with the caveat that a lot of companies that offer this free tier maybe don't offer support for those, and that's okay, because if you have really good developer documentation, you have really good self-serve options, then that really helps me understand and get in there and get my hands dirty and try it out. That's
cool. Yeah. Fatima, do you have any tips for how to make these kind of interactions go more smoothly?
Yeah, I love documentation. I mean, Mike touched on this just now, but I think any vendor that either that they have really good technical writers, or they make available to you the documentation before you have to lock in with the vendor forever. I think that's a really great sign. And getting to read their docs and how well they're written, and is there a doc for everything that you would need? If there's not, are they responsive to like adding docs when you want stuff? I think that is really great. I think, everyone knows documentation is underrated, but it's so important.
Ah, yes. And I can recommend there's a great article on Lead Dev about how to improve your engineering power by better writing and better documentation. That it's very worth reading. So a plug for the featured content on leaddev.com. Andrea, I threw the question to you because I'm getting a lot from this. What are ways that you've seen these relationships be most successful?
Yeah, like the proof of concept, the ability to try before you buy, all extremely, extremely important. And, while that perhaps wasn't happening 10 years ago, 15 years ago as much, like it really is table stakes now, I think. And that looks very different depending on the solution, right? So we did the most recent thing we did was a data integration, thing. We had one vendor say, I'm really sorry, but we can only give you 2 weeks, and then you have to commit for a year's worth for this solution. And I just said, I'm just going to tell you, we're not going to bother, because unless you have something else, that you can give us, that's just not enough for us to feel comfortable. So it turns out they didn't want to change, and so we had 2 other vendors. We went down to 2. And we had one vendor that worked for us for about 45 days to get all of our questions answered, to understand how this tool was going to fit in, to look at the load conditions, to look at the costing, and they really went the full way with us, and that was why we ended up going with them.
Terrific. And then Cisco, I'll finish off this round with you there. What tips do you have for partnering up with a vendor to set things up for success?
So the amazing thing is that throughout those periods of testing the product, right? You not only test the product, you test the engagement with those folks to that point, and you see, right? This is an investment that a company is making in someone else, right? And that investment involves a lot of returns that are not just the technology, right? And I think, and if you don't have a good indication that company can partner and work with you in the way that you expect, then that go forward becomes really muddy all of a sudden, right? And I think so absolutely that time spent. We went as far as, for one of the products that we evaluated, is building our own in-house scoring system with weighting along, with weights and scoring for each of the individual areas that they were providing for us, and that included their communication back with their engineers and how they worked with them at every level.
Excellent. Yes, and I think it's also sometimes good to remember that when you're a paying customer, that the balance of power shifts a little, and yes, it's easy to forget that sometimes. Sometimes it's like, if it's another team of engineers, they've got stresses, they've got strains. It's an external company. You're paying for this. So. Cool. And so then I wanted to finish with kind of like a show of hands question. Sometimes when you're talking with a vendor, they offer you customer references as a way to validate their solution. Just show of hands, how many of you would find those customer references valuable? Yeah, that's yes. So maybe let's say Andrea, you were the first to give a reaction. How do you think about customer references and researching other users of a solution?
I recall our pre-chat where I think we all really resonated on the back channel references, like talking to other people in industry, finding out what other people's experiences are, asking around, because those reference calls are the best case scenario. So you have to take that with a grain of salt.
Definitely. As I say, that was probably the most unanimous I've ever seen a discussion in I had a follow-up question for how do you do a good vendor call, and you're like, no, we don't do them, they're not viable. I'm like, cool, awesome, scored out half of my question. So let's see. Why don't we wrap up there? I think it's been really valuable. Thank you all so much for your time, for your insights, and a thank you to Rollbar for sponsoring this panel. And thank you, audience, for joining. We hope you'll stay tuned for our next and final panel today. Now that we've talked through how to successfully build or buy a new system, we'll move on to the challenges of integrating your new system with your existing infrastructure. So we'll be starting in about 15 to 20 minutes. It will be at 35 minutes past the hour. But Andrea, Cisco, Fatima, Mike, thank you for your time, and we'll see you soon.